My name is Samantha Holt, and I'm going to be doing my media project presentation on A Jury of Her Peers by Susan Glaspell. A Jury of Her Peers was written in 1917 by Susan Glaspell. It is a story about the discoveration and investigation of the murder of John Wright. But not only is it a story about the murder of John Wright, but also about the life of his wife, Minnie Wright. This story unfolds some of the troubles Minnie was experiencing and living with through Mrs. Hall and Mrs. Peters, which were the wives of the men investigating the crime and also distant friends to Minnie. In A Jury of Her Peers, Susan Glaspell uses symbolism to show the role women were expected to play in society. First, Glaspell uses the dead bird in her story to symbolize a woman's identity change once she is married. In this story, Mrs. Hall and Mrs. Peters discover the dead bird while searching through Mrs. Wright's home. The ladies found that the dead bird was killed by being strangled. They soon realized that Mr. Wright killed the bird. Glaspell used this dead bird to symbolize how Mrs. Wright was feeling strangled in her marriage by Mr. Wright. Mrs. Hall and Miss Peters mention how Minnie used to have a bright and cheerful personality, but since marriage she has changed and became more distant to them. The dead bird is used to symbolize how Minnie felt a sense of being caged in her marriage, unable to speak up for herself. But just as Mr. Wright strangled the life out of Minnie's pet bird, Minnie felt like she was figuratively being strangled by Mr. Wright in her marriage. Next, Glaspell uses the quilt in the story to symbolize how women are to be dutiful to their husbands. During Mrs. Hall and Miss Peters' search throughout Minnie's house, they found a quilt she had been working on. The majority of the quilt looked nice and neat, but the wives found a spot on the quilt where they discovered it looked like Minnie did not know how she wanted to finish it. This quilt is a symbol of Minnie's life, as she was unsure if she was going to continue to live with her abusive husband or do something to change it. Just as Minnie was unsure of how to finish the quilt, the wives are able to feel emotion for Mrs. Wright through the way she quilted as they began to discover what kind of life Mrs. Wright had been living and the situation she had been stuck in. The wives sympathized with Minnie and understood why she thought she had to kill her husband to be free again. Lastly, Glaspell uses trifles in the story as a way to symbolize the wife's role as a homemaker. As the Halls and Peters were searching through the Wrights' home after the murder, they noticed that Minnie's canning jars of fruit were left out. The men overlooked it as a mess that Minnie had left out after being arrested, but the wives were concerned that the jars of fruit would go bad after being left out overnight in the cold. This scene of the story is a great example of how men belittle women and their interest in the role of the home. The stereotype for women is to be in the home and are often viewed as less than their husbands. This stereotype can lead wives to feel unappreciated or even worthless, just as Minnie did. Although most times the wives do not go as far to kill their husband, they could be dealing with this in another emotional way. In conclusion, A Jury of Her Peers by Susan Glaspell uses symbolism to show a woman's role in society. As Minnie Wright appeared to have a simple and pleasant life, the events following the murder of her husband revealed a much different life than it seemed she had. Minnie, rather than continuing to live with her abusive husband, decided to go a different path. While many played the stereotypical role of a quiet, dutiful homemaker without a voice or a life of her own for many years, many finally decided that she had had enough. In the end, society has its expectations, but for many and many others, society was and still is wrong.